The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. We're reading today from Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. This is from chapter 1. It is only natural to begin this book where fascist politics invariably claims to discover its genesis, in the past. Fascist politics invokes a pure mythic past tragically destroyed. Depending on how the nation is defined, the mythic past may be religiously pure, racially pure, culturally pure, or all of the above. But there is a common structure to all fascist mythologizing. In all fascist mythic pasts, an extreme version of the patriarchal family reigns supreme, even just a few generations ago. Further back in time, the mythic past was a time of glory of the nation, with wars of conquest led by patriotic generals, its armies filled with its countrymen, able-bodied, loyal warriors whose wives were at home raising the next generation. In the present, these myths become the basis of the nation's identity under fascist politics. In the rhetoric of extreme nationalists, such a glorious past has been lost by the humiliation brought on by globalism, liberal cosmopolitanism, and respect for universal values such as equality. These values are supposed to have made the nation weak in the face of real and threatening challenges to the nation's existence. These myths are generally based on fantasies of a non-existent past uniformity, which survives in the traditions of the small towns and countrysides that remain relatively unpolluted by the liberal decadence of the cities. This uniformity, linguistic, religious, geographical, or ethnic, can be perfectly ordinary in some nationalist movements, but fascist myths distinguish themselves with the creation of a glorious national history in which the members of the chosen nation ruled over others, the result of conquests and civilization-building achievements. For example, in the fascist imagination, the past invariably involves traditional patriarchal gender roles. The fascist mythic past has a particular structure which supports its authoritarian hierarchical ideology. That past societies were rarely as patriarchal, or indeed as glorious, as fascist ideology represent them is beside the point. This imagined history provides proof to support the imposition of hierarchy in the present, and it dictates how contemporary society should look and behave. In a 1922 speech at the Fascist Congress in Naples, Benito Mussolini declared, "We have created our myth. The myth is a faith, a passion. It is not necessary for it to be a reality. Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the nation. And to this myth, this greatness, which we want to translate into a total reality, we subordinate everything. Here, Mussolini makes clear that the fascist mythic past is intentionally mythical. The function of the mythic past in fascist politics is to harness the emotion of nostalgia to the central tenets of fascist ideology: authoritarianism, hierarchy, purity, and struggle. With the creation of a mythic past, fascist politics creates a link between nostalgia and the realization of fascist ideals. German fascists also clearly and explicitly appreciated this point about the strategic use of a mythological past. The leading Nazi ideologue, Alfred Rosenberg, editor of the prominent Nazi newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, writes in 1924, "The understanding of and the respect for our own mythological past and our own history will form the first for more firmly anchoring the coming generation. Truth and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way." It is Thursday, and yesterday Congressman Pocan was not able to be with us, and so Middays with Mark is Thursday edition today. Congressman Pocan will be taking your calls on issues of the day. The number 202-808-9925. And I should mention, Congressman Pocan is the chair or the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, one of the top progressives in the House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
And thank you for being with us. And if I didn't say it, I think I did, but our number is 202-808-9925, and Congressman Pocan will be with us for the hour taking your calls. Congressman, you know, there's a lot going on that I'm curious your thoughts on real quickly. Well, you know, the lines are filling up. I understand that today is the deadline for, or we're coming up on the deadline for families to be reunited. Actually, I thought it was yesterday, as I think about it. And also, you mentioned Congress is closing, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And then finally, Jim Jordan and I forget who his buddy was who did it.
Mark Meadows, I think.
Yeah, that's right, Mark Meadows. Proposed impeaching Rod Rosenstein yesterday. You got 11 members of Congress behind this bill, which is a meaningless number. It's not going to make it out of committee. It's not going to make it to the floor. It is pure PR. And the Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is constantly introducing like really good, solid legislation that is not pure PR, that actually, I mean, from the budget that you guys do every year to, I know you've introduced a number of bills just in the last few weeks, or the last few months, that seem to get no publicity whatsoever. And yesterday, at least on MSNBC, I think that this impeachment bill got at least an hour's worth of aggregate coverage, probably more. What does this say about the state of our democracy and the state of our media and the state of politics?
Let me take the last one first, Tom. I mean, you know, I think often on this show we have people call up and say, how come this isn't happening? How come you guys aren't doing this? And then we tell them, no, we actually did a press conference. We actually did this. We actually have been working on it. But if the corporate media doesn't pick it up, it didn't happen, right? That's unfortunately how it happens. This week, Tom, we introduced our annual Progressive Caucus budget, a people's budget, which is a very comprehensive roadmap to a lot of the bills that we introduced in this session. So there's a lot of big ideas put out there. We're supposedly going to be taking up a budget vote maybe when we come back in September. And yet, while we had a few reporters did come, the only question they wanted to ask at the end was, it was the day that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was in town, and they wanted to know what she had to say, you know, because that's the topic they had in front of them. So it often is the challenge we have is to try to, you know, take these more meaty issues. And while we're not in the majority, yes, it's not going to happen. But, you know, these are actual issues that real people talk about that just don't get picked up all too often by the corporate media. Yeah,
it's like it's all about star power. And your thoughts on the family reunification and Congress going on vacation?
Yeah, so, I mean, you know, this is something I think, you know, people should know is this is the day that the House of Representatives, we all are home now for August, and we don't go back till after Labor Day. We should be traveling around our districts, talking to people. This is a great opportunity to make meetings with your representative, find them at public, hopefully if not doing town halls, public office hours, but take advantage of this time period to talk to them about whatever is important to you. One of those issues might very likely be the fact that today we are going to miss the court-mandated deadline to reunify all of the children with their parents, and there's a lot of questions that remain. I think over 400 parents have been already deported, so now we got to try to find them to reunify them with their children, which I find horrific that we deported the parents before the children. In a number of cases, they're telling us they're not going to reunify them because of vague reasons, and we haven't really been able to get enough of why that's not going to happen. But the bottom line is the poorly planned policy by Donald Trump to separate families at the border is still a mess. We don't have people reunified. 5-year-olds can still be kept in a cage, only now it's with their mother when they come here. And there's a whole lot more that has to be resolved. So that may be one of the issues people want to bring up during the next month when they've got a chance to see their member of Congress in the Senate.
Yeah, there you go. And what do you do if your member of Congress is a Republican and they only do telephone town halls and they screen the questions in advance, or if they don't do any kind of town hall?
Yeah, the good news is we know they're probably in district at least a part of that month of August. So they can't tell you they're not, at the local office for them. So you should call the local office up. They'll probably do some public events that will be listed. Go to those public events. But this is your opportunity to have that face-to-face time with your local representative.
Okay, cool. All right, let's pick up some calls. Every line is full here. We got calls from Washington to Wisconsin to California to Ohio to North Carolina to Virginia. Bob in San Jose, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, I was calling to ask about the status of the Congressional Review Act to reverse the FCC's repealing net neutrality. It's already passed in the Senate. Now I want to get an idea of what's happening in the House.
Yeah, so, this is something we've been trying to get signatures for. We need 218 signatures, majority of Congress, to try to do that. I think most every Democrat, there may be a couple that aren't on yet, but I think most every Democrat has signed it. I think I heard a first Republican might have signed it now in the last week or two, but that's our problem. Is we have to get a number of Republicans, about 20 or so members, 25 members, to sign it, so that should they sign that, then we could actually force that. And you would think, especially, that might be another great issue to bring up. I mean, if you don't want to have be charged different amounts for the Internet and who's getting access and who's getting a fast lane and who's not, this is your opportunity to raise that with your member, especially if it's a Republican member, because everyone should be signing that. They got it done in the Senate. Now the House is the only barrier to making sure that we keep a free and open Internet. So take advantage of that time to get a hold of members and ask them to sign that. And if they haven't, why not? If they have, thank them.
Ben in Cincinnati, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I'm an independent. I've voted on both sides of the aisle. And what I constantly hear from the Democratic side is just we have to stop Trump. And, Trump is obviously trying to do better border security and economy. But what I'm not hearing from the Democrats is, what's their message? What are the 2 or 3 things that they're going to do or want to move forward in the midterms and the general election? Because I think it's all kind of drowned out by we have to stop Trump, but stop doing what he's doing. But what are we going to do to move it forward?
Yeah, Ben, very fair and good question. So we basically are heading out towards the fall with the following. People say, what are Democrats going to do? Who are Democrats for? And we're saying for the people. One, we want to invest in a robust investment in our infrastructure and create those good family-supporting jobs that come out of that much-needed investment. 2, we want to help make sure that everyone has the ability to have access to health care and address the rising prescription drug prices. And 3, we want to address the corruption that we're seeing here in Washington. Donald Trump was successful when he said drain the swamp. The problem is he forgot that big corporations and big banks are part of the swamp, that the special interests that have way too much influence. So if we address those 3 areas, infrastructure and jobs, health care and prescription drugs, and addressing the corruption here, I think those are 3 things that we're going into November talking to people about in our districts.
That's very interesting. We had a long conversation about this over the last couple of days on this show, and what we kind of boiled down to was number 1, health care for all, Medicare for all. Number 2, education for all, debt-free education for all, and fix our public schools, by the way. And let's see, what was number 3? Well, so, yeah, anyhow, we're pulling together these things. And number 3, good-paying jobs for all, raise the minimum wage, bring back unions.
So two of the three are there,
Yeah.
and I think the third one, just because it's an underlying issue on everything, is everything from Ryan Zinke to Pruitt to, I mean, look at everyone, all the corruption that's been here. I mean, the swamp has not been drained; it's been dredged bigger, and a high-rise luxury condo has been built on it.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Middays with Mark, Thursday edition. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. You can contact him at pocan.house.gov, or you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. And welcome back. Mike, listening on KPFK in Los Angeles. You're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hi, thank you. Congressman, this is a completely hypothetical situation, but if you were facing election in a few weeks and you had a dark secret which might hurt your election chances, and you asked your imaginary fixer if we could make a $150,000 payment to conceal the information, whether it's through cash or done a corporation, wouldn't that violate federal election laws?
And I think that's exactly what people are looking at right now, right, with the release of the tape and the information about, this payoff right before the election. And there could be a lot more. We know there now is potentially a dozen tapes out there. But Michael Cohen looks like he's going to be cooperating, and I'm assuming you're going to hear a lot more about this as we move towards November, as the Mueller investigation now has over 30 indictments. It's doing its job, and I personally am very interested to see the continued direction of it, but I think this could very likely be a part of that direction.
Dave in Pittsburgh, California, you're on the air, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Congressman Pocan, I have a question to ask you about the War Powers Act. The president is supposed to come to Congress and ask your permission to declare war. And we have a situation arising now where he's rattling sabers and going crazy on the Internet and TV and everything on the cable networks and stuff like that, that he wants to go into Iran and, just totally devastate Iran. How and when is Congress going to take that power back away from the president, so he has to come to Congress personally to do these initiatives, so Congress has the power to utilize their power like they're supposed to do?
Great
and I'll
question.
take your answer on the air. Thank you.
Great. Dave, great question. Let me take it a little farther back. I mean, so we are still operating off of a AUMF, an authorization from post 9/11 that has been taken by every president since then very broadly, which is kind of going around the Constitution, which is you've got to go back to the Constitution if you're going to declare war unless you've been attacked. And right now, it's in the Twitter world. I mean, the problem with Donald Trump is this is a whole new level, how we experience presidential presidents and candidates and communication, right? So we're dealing with the stupidity of what he's doing in all capital letters, so he must be really serious with Iran. But more importantly, there's other situations where we think the War Powers Act comes in. And Ro Khanna from California and I and a couple of Republicans and some other members on both parties have been trying to move forward a War Powers Act resolution specifically on Yemen, because we're involved quite a bit with the Saudis on refueling and some Green Berets and some other levels on a war that we shouldn't be involved with without congressional approval. So that's something that may very likely come up in September just on that issue alone.
Remarkable stuff. Congressman Mark Pocan to answering your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Middays with Mark. Stick around. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Taking your calls for the hour. And Stephen in Santa Fe, New Mexico, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman Pocan, thank you for again offering your time to everybody. I was wondering, last month we had some mentioning by the press that Trump's charity foundation was using funds from charity to pay financing his campaign. Is that true, and is that being investigated, or is this just another one of the constant criminal acts this group of people has been doing?
Yeah, actually, this is, I believe, part of the case in New York State that the Attorney General is taking up. So they are looking at the charity, and from what I've heard, in some cases they're very, very concerned in very different ways on this than the Mueller investigation, just because it's a different front they're dealing with in New York State from the Attorney General. So you're right. And then also, I believe a judge this week said they can move forward on a case on the emoluments clause related to the Trump Hotel here in D.C. So there are some steps forward in looking after this, the abuse of this president and his family while serving in the White House. So I think it's a good thing. We're moving in the right direction.
Robert in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call. Second-time caller. First time I asked about visiting neighboring districts, and then adopted districts seemed to come along, and I think I feel great about it, and keep up the good work on that. Progressive Caucus, please continue to promote Medicare for all. But on the devil's advocate side, what does it look like regarding all the employees that are employed, pushing paper and billing, and how does that phase in or phase out in a Medicare for all situation?
Sure, Robert, thanks. So first of all, the adopted town hall, we had, I think, 29 members went into other districts, and I did 5 alone in Paul Ryan's district, and here Randy Bryce is scared away the Speaker of the House of Representatives. I think everyone's involvement in this has been helpful, so thanks for that. Specifically on Medicare for all, what we did is we just formed a caucus specifically to deal around this issue. Pramila Jayapal, Debbie Dingell, and Mark Veazey are I guess co-chairing would be the right word, that caucus. We have over 70 members involved with that, which is a great kickoff. And that's exactly what they're looking at right now. We've had a bill in the House for a while that dealt with this. Bernie Sanders introduced a bill this session in the Senate. We probably are going to draft our bill to match a little more to where the Senate bill is, just because a number of years have passed from when this was originally proposed. But I was just asked by a reporter about this as I left votes this morning. And, what we're doing at this point is building the support for it. We already know Medicare is an extremely popular program that makes it easier to expand off of that program. But there will be some details that have to be discussed about people who have jobs displaced and other things. But bottom line is we still have an educational process. The good news is when you do town halls, whether it be in Paul's district or mine, the subject of health care always comes up. And inevitably, when you get to the subject of Medicare for all, it gets the single greatest response. After watching the Republicans try to attack health care all last year, and they did successfully do it in their tax bill in November, people are concerned, and I think they're looking at this as a possible route, and we just have to make sure we're explaining to people what it would mean to take care of this. And then those details will happen, I think, when we get to a new session.
Linda in Coconut Creek, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Congressman, for taking my call. Hi, Tom. We love you guys.
Thanks.
I just had a question for you. Have you heard anything up on the Hill about the Central States Teamsters pension plan that's about to defund in about 5 years? You're talking 400,000 Teamsters, and we want to know what's going on. And I'm sorry, I'm not being disrespectful. They want to bail out these farmers when we put 30, 40 years of our lives in. We want to know what's going on with our pension.
Yeah, very, very.
And I'll take your answer off the air.
Yeah, Linda, so there is a special committee between the House and the Senate that's been appointed bipartisan to look at pensions, and they're supposed to have something figured out by November. I would be lying if I told you I think it's going to be super successful in doing that. I think, pensions in general are a huge issue we're going to have to deal with the next few years as we find a lot of people are independent contractors and have nothing put aside whatsoever in terms of benefits. Specifically to your question around the Central States, there's about 200, I think, different organizations that are part of that fund that could go bankrupt, and we have to address it. And that's the main thrust of what they're looking at. But there's also the miners and some other folks that are really involved in this. And as you know, Linda, part of your negotiations for salary, in lieu of increases in salary, you took increases in your pension or your benefits. And now to take that away would be like double dipping in you didn't get it in your pay, but you negotiated that as a future payment. And we have to address this issue. So I'm hoping that this committee will at least flesh out some of the details. I don't think they're going to have the final resolution by November, but it is absolutely on people's radar screen.
Great. Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Middays with Mark, Thursday edition. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. He is the co-chair of the the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and also represents the state of Wisconsin. Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author, and but you can still get it online. A lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Excuse me, think of George Bush in 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it, but in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them, living apart, is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent. It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the uses of himself. The principle of equality has prepared men for these things. It has predisposed men to endure them and oftentimes to look on them as benefits. I have always thought that the servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereign of the people. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to remain free. As they cannot destroy either one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. And it continues. It's a brilliant book, A Democracy in America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Congressman Mark Pocan on the line taking your calls. Linda in Santa Rosa, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. I think the mention of the authorization of use of military force previously is a stop measure, because what we really need to do is update our Constitution in regards to the War Powers Act, because that was written back at the time when we had to muster troops because we didn't have a standing army, and if we declared war, we took a month or so to get across the ocean. Now we have technology with a full standing armory all over the world, and you can launch missiles and send fighter jets in a couple hours to get all over the place. And so I think that the Constitution, and I don't know what the amendment should be, but to recognize that the technology is far different than when it was first drafted, and it may need a a gang of 8 or something like that, congressional leaders that are working with the president and the executive branch in order to respond to things, because it's not going to take a month like it used to.
Yeah, Linda, that's a really great point. The only thing I guess I would say is a constitutional amendment is really hard to get done. The AUMF, we've had some success, some bipartisan success. Republicans also realize that presidents in both parties have very happily not come to Congress and just taken it on their own to deal with this because it saves them time. But the whole idea is they need to make the case to Congress because we're the closest to the people. So the AUMF, we were really close last year. Barbara Lee got it passed in our Appropriations Committee with, I think, an almost unanimous vote, Democrats and Republicans, and then Paul Ryan himself took it out of the process. So we still have some work to do on that, but we're starting to build some bipartisan support. But I really appreciate what you said, because I think you brought up a really good point that, sometimes some of these things were in place at a very different time and era, and, you can certainly move troops in a very different way now, and even how warfare is done is very different now.
Yeah, the Second Amendment, I think, is an equal anachronism in that context. Larry in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Mark, I wish you were my congressman. I want to know your view, thoughts on my view that the country needs Joe Biden as a healer, just like Ford was a healer. He's in a unique position with all his experience and contacts and friends in the Congress. Even if we could only have him for 4 years, he could help bring this country together. And I think he ought to be combined with a female progressive that would help line up all the new forces in our party. That's I'm interested in what you think. Thank you.
Yeah, Larry, thank you for the call. And, hopefully this fall, Iron Stash will be your new member, so you're going to be very proud of a member instead of having who you have right now. Or actually, Elkhart, you might actually have a different member, but sorry about that. What I can tell you is you're going to have a lot of presidential candidates. My guess is you may have 15 to 20 potential people running like the Republicans did in the last cycle, because there is a lot of interest. I'm seeing it from governors, I'm seeing it from senators, I'm seeing it from members of the House, I'm seeing it from non-electeds, I'm seeing it from business leaders. I think everyone figures if Donald Trump can be president, why can't they? And you're going to have a lot of potential candidates. So, Joe Biden clearly brings in a lot of experience, as does Bernie Sanders, as does Elizabeth Warren. There's a lot of folks that would fit that description. But I think we'll have a good, robust debate when people announce, and I think soon after the November elections, you'll see a lot of the candidates really starting to be presidential candidates. But, I think any Democrat will do a better job than what we've seen with Donald Trump.
Richard, listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk in Chicago, Richard, you're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Oh, hi. I wondered if Democrats, I've been wanting to get on to ask this question. Do Democrats think they have a media problem or an issue, getting our message across, and also becoming significant in the political debate? Is it for, you mentioned earlier on that you had several amendments weren't being covered by the mainstream media. So I've been wondering and waiting for the Democrats to start to get ahead of the media message and not just being, playing catch up after hoping that Trump will eventually, go away. J.D. Woodruff had a session had Sessions on to talk about the trade imbalance for 10 minutes. Not one Democrat was invited in. I just seem like the Republicans have figured out how to get their messaging to grab the 100% of the airways. And I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not a politician. But isn't there anybody working on how to elevate our presence and our significance in the political debate nowadays?
Sure.
It's kind of a long question.
Yeah, well, Richard, a part of it, the problem we have is we're not in charge right now. So they often go to the Republicans to talk about things. And when they do talk about some of the opposition issues, some of the cable networks especially, they talk about Russia, and then once in a while they talk about Russia. And occasionally they'll talk about health care or jobs or the actual issues that people talk about at their kitchen tables they're concerned. I'm not trying to diminish Russia. I think there's a place in every newscast that you can talk about some of the developments that are happening on the Mueller investigation or related issues. But that is not what most people talk about 24/7 is Russia. Quite honestly, it is the corruption that they see in Washington on multiple levels, of which Russia is some of it. They talk about whether or not they have good-paying jobs, and the infrastructure, I think, is one of the things that people really do believe we need to invest in. And they talk about health care and prescription drug prices. Those are some of the top issues. There's other things, but I think often it's hard because how the media covers things is not necessarily where real people are at, and therefore they don't cover some of the issues that we raise in Washington.
I would add Jeff Cohen from Fairness and Accuracy in Media, fair.org, points out that in the years prior to the President Obama becoming president and the Democrats taking over the House and Senate in 2005 to 2008, Republicans were overwhelmingly, 60% or thereabouts, the guests on all the Sunday shows. And when they were asked why, the answer was always, well, the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House, so they're the ones in power. We should have them on more frequently. Then Obama wins, and the Democrats win, and they continue to have 60% Republicans, or higher than 50%. And when they were asked why, the answer was, well, the Republicans are out of power, so people need to hear their voices. And so it's like, no matter what you do, the Sunday shows are always going to be dominated by Republicans. It seems this is the preference of corporate America, or corporate media, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and also just sometimes they get onto an issue and they decide they're going to write about the issue no matter what. So reporters around here in Washington all want to know about the leadership battle in the Democratic caucus, when I guarantee there is no one in the real world who cares much about that right now. But that's what they want to talk about here. So, we often are fighting against those currents.
Yeah. Norman, in Millsboro, Delaware, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, good afternoon, Tom. I have to tell you first, before I ask my question, that you and Congressman Pocan are definite treasures. I mean, you don't know how much the public appreciates you guys when you come on and give us this information that we don't usually get.
Well, thank you, Norman.
And
thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Thank you very much. I mean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Anyway, let me ask my question so I can get off. I want to find out, I know Paul Ryan is trying to kill or trying to make drastic cuts in Medicare and Social Security. I would like to know exactly, where are we with that now? Is there going to be cuts, and who's going to be affected?
Sure. So, Paul Ryan, his entire career has been built on a couple of things. One, cutting taxes for the wealthy, for their donors, for people who belong to Mar-a-Lago. And the other is to go after things like Social Security and Medicare, which, given when his father died, he was a recipient of Social Security, really is pretty amazing, right? That he wants to take away the ladder for other people who need help like he got. But those are what he's focused on. He got his tax bill done in November, and he was even able to throw some health care stuff in there. So we're all going to have double-digit increases in October because he had to give $2 trillion to the wealthiest in this country through that tax bill. I don't think he's going to be able to go directly after them between now and November because the elections are too volatile and people really support Social Security and Medicare. But he will continue to find backdoor ways to try to go after them. And they're even talking about a tax bill 2.0 in September, where, again, they'll probably offer a couple little bits to the middle class and then take care of their donors. And they may try to do some backdoor attacks in that bill, so we have to watch it. But the good news is people support Social Security, they support Medicare, and as long as we continue to fight for that and elect candidates who will fight for it and oppose those who will cut it, we can make sure that we protect them. But I would also argue we need to strengthen them, not just protect them, and that needs to be part of the national debate.
By backdoor attacks, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that in the GOP tax bill, the Republican tax bill that passed last year, that they reduced the funding for administrative functions in Social Security and Medicare. And the consequence of that is that when you call Social Security or you call Medicare or you go visit their offices, instead of waiting for 10 minutes or a half hour, you're going to start waiting for 2 and 3 hours. People are going to start getting more and more, frankly, pissed off about, these agencies and more willing to accept the idea that, oh, United Healthcare will take your call just like that, right? Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And then also, they want people to then decide the privatization is the right way to go, and that furthers their case. But, with Paul Ryan, I know him very well from being my neighboring district. It's been tax policy for the wealthy and going after Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah, there you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark, Thursday edition here on the Thom Hartmann Program. 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. You can reach him at Rep. Mark Pocan on Twitter, and his website is pocan.house.gov.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus taking your calls for the hour, Mark Pocan, right after this. And welcome back. Joe in Gordonsville, Virginia. Am I saying that right? Watch us on Free Speech TV.
Yeah, Tom.
Joe, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman, I heard on Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! Last week that they were combining the Labor Department with the Department of Education. The reason I'm concerned is I'm retired from the Carpenters Union out of D.C., and the Labor Department controls a lot of our pensions, our union pensions, and I was wondering why they were doing it, and if you knew anything about it, and I will take your answer offline. And thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, great question, Joe. So we have seen all kinds of rules that unfortunately came in very late in the Obama administration to strengthen people's ability to form a union, to have a voice in their workplace, to have workplace rules that work on their behalf. And then we saw the Trump administration take them away. And unfortunately, the Obama administration waited so very late to put them in place, and now we've lost those. And on the education side, Betsy DeVos, putting her in charge of education is obviously an irony in many ways. She doesn't know what she's doing. And what they're trying to do, again, is saying they're de-emphasizing things like public education and people's workers' rights by trying to take these agencies and say they don't mean that much, so we're going to put them together and then we'll have this other agency. So what they're doing is they're just showing that they have a lack of importance for things like public education and for workers. It's really that plain and simple. And you can just tell by the picks they put to be secretaries of the departments that they really don't believe in the functions of those agencies.
It's really quite extraordinary. It really and truly is. My next Free Speech TV caller is talking to Sure right now, but it's the only one on the board. Everybody else is on commercial radio. So, do you see the legislature addressing these issues?
Right now, here's what I anticipate. I mean, the last couple of weeks have been pretty meaningless here. We did a bunch of suspensions, which are generally non-controversial bills. We renamed a lot of post offices. We're in for a couple weeks in September. I think they're going to try to get appropriation bills done probably via an omnibus, hopefully not a continuing resolution, but who knows. There's some rumors that the couple weeks we're in October, we may not be here because they got to get their members out to campaign. Honestly, not much is happening until probably we get to a lame duck session because in the House anyway, they know they're in jeopardy of losing their majority. And in the Senate, they also could, but it's not quite as likely. But I don't anticipate a lot of big things happening between now and November.
Lame duck session, post-election. You've got this period of time after the election and before the inaugurations in the first week of January that if the Democrats take control of the House, or even more dramatically, the House and the Senate, do you expect the Republicans to try and jam through a bunch of just really god-awful stuff at the last minute? I mean, is that what you're seeing?
Yes. In fact, when I got elected, I remember I was in Key West, Florida, sitting at an establishment, having a beverage, an adult beverage, watching them vote on C-SPAN on New Year's Eve. And I am anticipating that very likely could happen. They may keep us out there a bunch to get a lot of bills done while they still have majorities in both houses.
Wow, amazing. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And let's see here, Deborah in Santa Fe, New Mexico, listening on KTRC. Hey, Deborah, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom, and bless you both. Congressman Pocan, love you and everything you do. I have a thought that perhaps the congressman can't directly address, but can address the possible collegial possibilities. I remember when Jim Jeffords changed parties from Republican to Independent and changed the makeup of the Senate. I think we need to do a really big campaign with all your listeners and all your colleagues, Congressman, to encourage Senator McCain, who doesn't want the president at his funeral, to become an independent, and to encourage Jeff Flake, Bob Corker, both of whom are leaving the Senate, and Jeff Flake is on the Judiciary Committee. We have to prevent Kavanaugh, or we're really, I feel, going down the slippery slope.
And maybe even the senator from Maine and Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah, well, yes.
Susan Collins.
Susan Collins, yeah. And yes, and Murkowski. So, I mean, I think we can do an all-out campaign of calling these senators, and especially John McCain.
Let's get Congressman Pocan's thoughts on it. We're getting redundant here, Deborah. Congressman?
Okay. Yeah, Deborah, I'll tell you, the one thing that makes it a little bit difficult is we don't have many people left that are in the Republican Party that are moderates that could maybe change parties, even if it is just to independent, because they've been purged out thanks to all the gerrymandering and redistricting. So, John McCain ran nationally as a Republican. I don't necessarily see him switching to an independent, even though he really has a problem with Donald Trump. I think he still believes in his heart and his voting record is he really is a Republican. Same thing with Jeff Flake. Same thing with Bob Corker. The problem is, as you said, they decide to leave rather than stand and fight, which then just means you've got more people that will let Donald Trump be Donald Trump, which is disastrous. So I appreciate the sentiment you're saying. I think there may be a little bit more of a difficulty in that there are so few actual moderates left. Donald Trump may be changing the Republican Party in some ways, but I think they still feel that they are mainstream Republicans.
Yeah. Plus, Flake and Corker are both looking at jobs after they leave, and
right.
Sticking it to the Republican Party might hurt their job prospects. Leslie in Chicago, listening to WCPT. We're down to about 2 minutes here, Leslie. Quick one.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much, Congressman Pocan and Tom. Regarding the important Medicare for All, there is a bill in the House with 123 co-sponsors, H.R. 676. It's Medicare improvement and expansion, and it also deals with the transition period for people in the industry whose jobs are affected, and also the healthcare professionals. Please make sure people read it so they can talk about it and inform the public, because the major media does not do their job. It is what they leave out, not lies, that make the media biased. I think you just spoke about that. That's H.R. 676.
Leslie, thank you. Thank you very much. Congressman, your thoughts?
Yeah, Leslie, so good point. In fact, it is 65% of the House Democrats are on that bill, which most people don't know. Bernie introduced the bill because the Senate always gets more coverage than the House. He has, I forgot the exact number, but it's about a third of the Senate that's on that bill. Here we have two-thirds, and it rarely gets covered. The one thing I do want to say, though, is we are going to change the language of that bill a little bit, because that's been around for a number of years, and we're probably going to have language a little closer to the bill that Senator Sanders introduced. But you're right. People need to know that there is support in Congress for the concept of Medicare for All, and that's why we formed the caucus last week, so that we can really get this done should we be able to take the majority.
So in our last 20 seconds, Congressman, what should we be looking at in the week coming up?
Find out where your members are going to be in August, because a lot of them are going to be home. They should be home. They're not in Washington. The Senate may stay, but I don't think for that long, a week or two. I think it's more of a show that McConnell's putting on. But make sure you grab access to your members and be heard. This is your best chance to do that.
Yeah, and maybe your last. We'll see. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you, as always. Congressman Pocan, his website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be back with more of the news of the day, and actually Professor Richard Wolff is going to be with us in the second hour. Lori Wallach will be with us in our third hour, so it's going to be a fascinating day, and I got a lot of news to share with you, too. So please stick around. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with the Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task. Wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, the captain, Alonso Lopez de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs. Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject, just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, the case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, there was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and drop his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, let me try the son of a bitch, I can hit him. He got down off his horse, kneeled down and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped. We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage. And it continues.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author most recently of Capitalism Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. His website's democracyatwork.info and rdwolf.com with 2 Fs. And you can tweet him at Prof. Wolf with 2 Fs. Professor, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. I'm glad to be here, even if it's by my cell phone.
Yeah, it's always great having you with us. There's a piece over at Naked Capitalism titled America's Subprime Economy, which suggests that the economic growth of the last 2 years in particular, but it's, you know, the kind of the peak of a growing trend, has been driven, instead of being driven by spending at the top 60% of the economy, which I guess is normal, it's being driven by the bottom 40%, and that those people in the bottom 40% of the economy are borrowing in order to accomplish that, which suggests to me that they've kind of hit the point after, you know, what, a decade out from the financial crisis, the Bush crash, where they've run out of everything that they could do. And now they've got to resort to borrowing to maintain their standard of living. And that seems to me like a really, really dangerous, like heading for the cliff kind of thing. I'm curious, your thoughts on this, or am I exaggerating the importance of this?
No. If anything, I would argue that you're being modest or moderate in what you have to say. And here's my reasoning. The 2008 crash was a cataclysmic blow to all the people that had borrowed money in the years leading up to that. And we're talking about the 1990s, at least, back even into the 1980s, when wages stopped rising in the United States, which happened during the 1970s. The American dream still was in the minds of the American working people, and since you couldn't get more wages to buy that increasingly pricey American dream, you went into debt. And, you know, it doesn't take a genius to understand that if the 1990s and early into this century, you borrowed more and more on a basically stagnant real income, this is an unsustainable arrangement. You will eventually have more debt than you can service, and that's what happened in 2007 and 2008. And it left a terrible fear in the minds of the American working class to ever let themselves get loaded up again with that kind of debt. So that when the report that you just summarized comes out, people who understand this realize that the American working people must again be at a point of desperation, not just to borrow when they can't do anything else, but to borrow when it's in their fresh memory how terribly dangerous that was. So it's a perfect indicator of the stress level of this economic system, just below the veneer of the hype of everything being fine that you get from the government.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is that the non-housing debt of American consumers, that would be credit card debt, car loans, but not mortgages, but the non-housing and student loans was at as low as 16% in 1992, and it's been climbing steadily, and it's particularly exploded since 2012, and it's now over 26%. So that's, you know, 16% to 26% as
that's right. It's an enormous reliance of the mass of people on this debt for which there is no basically no collateral. The student debt, the car debt, the credit card debt, and so forth. And it's a sign. It's a sign of desperation that the savings have been used up, if there were any. And the basic cost of living in America at this time is such that unless you're willing to live at a drastically reduced standard of living, you load up on debt. And I want to remind everyone, we now know that the so-called boom of the 1980s and 90s, of which Bill Clinton used to speak so proudly, was a boom based on debt, on a crescendo of debt. And it proved to be as dangerous as that always is. To be aware now that we're going into the same sequence ought to make people's heads explode, or at least some kind of national debate. And let me add one more thing. We are now going into an extravagant expansion of government debt right alongside, because the tax cut, the Trump tax cut of December 2017, is now showing up. There's a front page story on today's New York Times, is showing up as a drastic worsening of the deficit of the government. So the government's loaded up in debt and the population is loading up in debt. This is a story whose ending we've seen all too often, and it's an ending that ought to make people tremble.
Meantime, we have Axios reporting that while, as a consequence of the GOP tax scam, this giant tax cut, corporations took home massively more pay than pretty much anybody else, corporate CEOs, excuse me. And the average worker's income over the last 2 years has actually declined a little bit.
That's right. And if you understand how these flows work, you can be even more taken aback. Here's how it works. In December of 2017, I mean, this was going on before, but here's how much worse it's got. In December 2017, you cut corporate taxes from 35% to 21%. Now, over the last 6 months, these corporations have been generating wild amounts of spendable cash because they don't have to pay billions in taxes they used to pay. Well, what have they done? Created a lot of jobs? Not at all. They have mostly used it to do what's called stock buybacks. They use the money they don't pay in taxes to go into the market and buy the shares of their own companies. Why do they do that? Because the pay packages of the CEOs and the other top officials are linked to the value of the commodity, of the stocks in the stock market. So they use the money the government doesn't collect in taxes, go into the stock market, drive up the share value of their company, and then use that increased share value to draw in billions, with a B, of extra corporate pay, and that's what that Axios article does and what other research shows. So this has been a double bonanza. First, they get their taxes cut, and now they can boost their salaries into the stratosphere of millions of dollars by pouring that money into the stock market, which, by the way, is what Trump and the GOP said would not happen, that jobs would be created. Nothing of the sort has been achieved. Those jobs that have been created are in the service sector, pay the least amount of money, and therefore can't affect the larger economic system in the way that they had predicted. So this is a perfect storm, and as I said, this cannot end well.
Yeah, and I would add that, you know, prior to the Reagan presidency, this form of corporate manipulation and the whole stock buybacks as compensation was illegal, and go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add another thing that ought to frighten people. More and more, the Securities and Exchange Commission filings are showing that these corporate executives, having driven up the shares of the stock in the way I described by using money they used to pay in taxes, are cashing out. That is, they're taking these enhanced value shares and selling them in the market because they themselves see that this can't end well, and so it's better to unload those shares now rather than risk them being in your portfolio when the reckoning comes the way it did in 2008 and 9, when shares lost, half their value in a matter of weeks. The anxiety level, even of those in charge and who are riding this tiger, the anxiety level ought to be a warning to all of us.
Yeah. So, you know, in our last minute or three here, how do you see this ending? Number one, you mentioned a couple of times, I don't see this ending well. What can people do about that? And what can people do more broadly about what should we be doing to fix the economy?
Well, you know, again, in the 2 minutes that we might have for this, I think the best I can say to that question is we have got to learn as a nation to think differently about this issue from the way we have. This is not going to be fixed by a different interest rate from the Federal Reserve or a new law passed by Congress or even a change of president from Trump to something else that's less crazy. We're dealing with an underlying economic system that doesn't work, that's run out of gas, and there has to be a debate about what kinds of much more basic changes than we've been willing to look at in this country are necessary so that we don't go from pillar to post, from one crisis to another, worrying all the time the way we've just done for the last 15 minutes about how and when the next perfect storm is going to overwhelm us. We've had a 50-year period of cheerleading for the capitalist system we have. It's time we grew up as a nation, matured, asked the hard questions about a system that works this way, and then really face the question and debate it. Can we do better than this system? I'm one of those who's convinced we can, but I don't want to force it on anybody. I just want us to have the courage as a nation to realize these difficulties that you and I discussed and have that debate finally as we should have.
Remarkable. Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tom. I'm glad for the opportunity.
And I hope in future weeks we can continue to talk about what those solutions might be. Professor Richard Wolff, you can tweet him at Democracy at WRK or at Prof. Wolff with 2 Fs. His website, democracyatwork.info, and rdwolff with 2 Fs.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Oh, let's see here. Oh, Bob, you're listening to WCPT. I'm sorry about that. Carol in Twin Cities, Minnesota. Hey, Carol, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up? Or in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. What's up, Carol?
Something that came up when you were talking to Mark Pocan, and it occurred to me that with a lot of government services that have been, where the infrastructure has been cut, people have donated their time to help others. And I think about, I learned an awful lot about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all the rest of that stuff for my mother. And I've helped some people, but there is no necessarily people that will just be there to answer questions. And I'm thinking maybe, and Congressman Pocan could say whether or not this is even possible, we could form a group of people that are willing to help people with their problems so that they can cut through, so they can get from point A to point B much more quickly.
With regard to what?
Pardon?
With regard to what?
To prepare them for if they've got a problem with Social Security, if they've got a problem with Medicare, applications and so on and so forth, that there could be this volunteer group that would help people with that, which would alleviate some of the stress on the people that are working for the government, trying to do their best.
That's a good idea, and it's actually a business niche right now. There are people all around the country who are, probably former bookkeepers or CPAs who are setting up shop as Medicare and Social Security consultants, essentially. And the tragedy, Carol, is that it doesn't need to be this complicated. The level of complexity associated with Social Security and Medicare now is the result of Republican meddling with both of these programs repeatedly. And the inability to reach somebody on the phone or deal with it or even pay Medicare online, all of that is the result of Republicans putting those things into law, actually, like in the tax scam bill where they laid off a whole bunch of Social Security and Medicare workers to make it more confusing for us.
Absolutely, and I think that maybe next time Congressman Pocan is on, you could talk to him about maybe forming a civilian corps to help with your Medicare, Medicaid questions and to help you get through the paperwork and everything else so that when you finally meet with that employee, you have all your ducks in a row.
Yeah. An alternative would be to get Democrats in control of the House and the Senate and pass legislation that would refund the Social Security Administration and Medicare Administration so that actual government employees would be available to help you out and walk you through things, and then start simplifying these systems. I mean, I think Social Security should just automatically kick in when you turn 65. You should start getting a check.
Yes. Well, and I would agree. And the other thing is that if you're talking about getting the Democrats to do the right thing, absolutely, and that is up to us to get out and vote to get them in office. And once we've got them in office, to not sit back and go, okay, now we're done. No, once we get them in office, then the job is to keep them there and to get them to do what we want.
Yeah, amen. Thanks a lot, Carol, for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hartmann here with you. Boy, a lot going on. We talked about this whole America's subprime crisis. I talked with Professor Wolf about this, but it's worth pointing out again. This is over at nakedcapitalism.com, and the headline is America's Subprime Economy. And it's really startling. It is looking like people in the bottom 40% of the economy, this would be people making probably less than $25,000 or $30,000 a year, are really starting to go into debt in a serious way to maintain their lifestyles. And that's just a tragedy. Meanwhile, Postcards for America tweets out a photo from Manhattan. The Fifth Avenue is shut down was at 10:27 a.m. this morning. I'm guessing that's Eastern time. Was this morning in New York City, and you can see the pictures. And they return the children. Where are the children? They're holding. These people have crossed the street with a giant banner, and right in front of Trump Tower, and they've shut down Fifth Avenue. And their statement is, "You take the children, we'll take the streets." So I don't know if any of you have seen that or been there or whatever, but it's quite remarkable. Meanwhile, the House Republicans, this is over at Think Progress, Danielle McLean writing about it, in their new legislation, the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act, which was proposed by HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, the Making Affordable Housing Work Act, which was pushed out in April, just passed the House Financial Services Committee along party lines, 34 to 23. All the Republicans voted for it, all the Democrats voted against it. And, you know, basically what this does is, well, the headline tells it all. House Republicans want to impose work requirements on foster kids facing homelessness. Yep, foster children who age out of the foster care system. They're saying, yeah, if you want housing assistance, you're going to have to get a job. And there's a lot of places where there's just no jobs, and that's why people need housing assistance. Or the jobs that are available, you know, I mean, you hear about Republicans, oh, the economy's wonderful. We got more job offers than we've got people willing to fill them. Well, those job offers are at $7.25 an hour, and you can't live on that in pretty much any place in the United States. And so this is bizarre stuff. Meanwhile, the impeachment, the articles of impeachment that these 11 right-wing crazies introduced, Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan leading the pack in the House of Representatives yesterday. One of the things they're charging the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein with is something that happened 6 months before he took the job. Another thing that they're accusing him of an investigator not recusing himself from an investigation that literally does not exist. And another is a House Republican conspiracy theory about the origins of the Russia investigation that was completely debunked by the release of the Carter Page FISA documents. So, you know, they want to impeach him for things that aren't even things that he did or that are illegal, or, I mean, it's just, it's pathetic, for lack of a better word. It's just absolutely pathetic. And then finally, I wanted to draw your attention to a couple of other things. Number one, we've been talking about debt. Betsy DeVos wants to make it harder for students who were screwed by Corinthian Colleges and ITT Technical Institute, which both, you know, not only went bankrupt and left a whole, but these are for-profit colleges, chains. Not only did they go under, but they did false advertising and misleading claims for years. And the Obama administration set up a fund with millions of dollars to make whole the people who had student loans. And Betsy DeVos wants to make it harder for people to get access to those, you know, that government help with the student loans from, you know, right-wing for-profit companies that rip them off.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Just another part of Betsy DeVos's ongoing campaign against education and working-class people in the United States, the billionaire heiress who runs our education department. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Gar Alperovitz's book, What Then Must We Do? Gar is an economist, by the way, and this is from the introduction. I borrowed my title, What Then Must We Do, from Tolstoy and the profoundly disturbing 1886 book that he wrote once he began to dig below the surface of what was happening in late 19th century Russia, a time when the system was in decay, the aristocracy enjoyed extraordinary luxury, and the peasants endured lives of hunger and pain. As a person of privilege, he began to understand something deeper about his time in history. Tolstoy wrote, I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me, and yet assure myself and others that I am very sorry for him and wish to ease his lot by all means possible, except by getting off his back. Most of us do not literally sit on men's backs, making them carry us. We do, however, often uneasily look the other way, satisfying ourselves with modest changes that reassure us that all is well, while millions are in despair. We've done the best we can do, we might say, given the realities. Still, many sense, as did Tolstoy, that to actually do something serious would require us to confront much deeper problems than we are commonly willing to do. What then must we do is not shouted in the streets, but it is a question that more and more Americans, young and old, liberal, radical, and conservative, are quietly beginning to ask themselves in much more penetrating ways. So let us begin. My starting point is the obvious fact that despite its great wealth, the United States faces today enormous difficulties, with no easily discernible political answers that even begin to offer strategic handholds on a truly democratic future. Elections occur and major fiscal debates ensue, but many of the most pressing problems facing ordinary citizens are only marginally affected, and in many cases in ways that increase burdens, not reduce them. The issue is not simply that our situation is worrisome, however. It is that there are growing reasons to believe that we in fact face systemic problems, not simply political ones. Systemic problems in the fundamental, not the superficial sense. In the pages ahead, I will suggest that our nation's truly critical problems are built into the very structure of the economic and political system. They are not something passing in the night that will go away even when we elect forward-looking thinkers and actively pressure them to move in a different direction. I won't load you down with statistics at this point. A couple of obvious reminders, however. Not only has the economy been stagnating for a long time, but for the average person and the average family, things have been bad for a very long time. Real wages for 80% of Americans' workers, for example, have not gone up more than a trivial amount for the last 3 decades. At the same time, income for the top 1% has jumped from nearly 10% of all income to roughly 20% of all income. Put another way, virtually all of the gains of the entire economic system have gone to the tiny, tiny group at the top for at least 3 decades. Worth pausing to think about that one. What's going on when virtually all the gains for the entire economic system go to the top? I'm not interested here in criticizing those at the top. The question is, we can do that later, the question is, what is going on with the system when this kind of thing happens and continues to happen in an ongoing way, year after year, decade after decade? Another reminder, almost 50 million Americans live in officially defined poverty. The rate is higher, not lower, than in the late 1960s, another disturbing trend marker. Moreover, if we use the measuring standard common throughout the advanced world, which considers the poverty level to be half the median income level, the number would be just under 70 million, and the rate would be almost 23% of all Americans living in poverty. That is to say nothing of steady increases in global warming and an unemployment rate that, if properly measured, is stuck in the range of roughly 15%. At the most superficial level, Washington, as the saying goes, is broken. Give or take an occasional gain in selected areas, the political system is simply incapable of dealing with the deeper challenges. Its focus on deficits it focuses on deficits, not answers. Long trends that don't change are a clear signal that it's not simply the modern period of partisan bickering and congressional stalemate that is causing the problems. The trends are moving steadily downward. We're moving steadily downward long before the Tea Party and the recent partisan foolishness, long before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision allowed corporations to put big money directly into politics, and long before many events that have heralded as tipping points one kind or another. Nor are people stupid. More and more have a sense that something different is going on, both with the economy and more fundamentally with democracy itself. A few more bits of information just as reminders again of something that we're all beginning to see. A mid-2011 poll found that roughly 80% of Americans believe their congressional representatives to be, quote, more interested in serving the needs of special interest groups than the people they represent, end quote. Another poll found that almost 4 out of 5 believe a few rich people in corporations have far too much power. And only 37% of Americans, much more than a third of the population, have confidence in the most solemn and august of American institutions, the Supreme Court. I'm going to dig much, much deeper into all of this, of course, but for now, let's leave it at this. When critical, long trends do not improve, when they steadily get worse year in and year out, it is clear that we face deeply rooted systemic problems, not simply political problems in the usual sense of the term. Moreover, as these polls suggest, people increasingly understand that something is really wrong. The question is, how do we deal with a systemic crisis, something built into the way the political economy works, rather than just a simple political or economic crisis? Garo Pavlovitz, what then must we do?
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Bob in Rockford, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom, a couple of things real quick. You've talked about organizing precinct committee people in the county parties, and you actually spoke in DuPage County a couple years back. We did that there with Operation Turn DuPage Blue, and here in Rockford and Winnebago County, we got a bunch of people that are working to do that here. So we would love to have you come to Rockford and talk about this and rally the troops for us.
Well,
I don't know what needs to be present.
We need to talk to WCPT about that and do it as a station visit, and I'd encourage you to contact the management of the local station.
Sure, I'll do that. But what I'm calling about also is Mark Pocan's bill, H.R. 3091, the Voter Roll Integrity Act. I see that there are more sponsors on it, and I've been working to get more sponsors around the country. I don't understand why the pundits don't get this, the political pundits, and why this problem of the interstate crosscheck is not being screamed from the rooftops as we march towards a constitutional convention as a result of it.
Right.
I don't get it.
My guess is, there's no shortage of Democrats who are willing to come on this program and scream about the interstate crosscheck program, but they're, as Congressman Pocan said, as a Democratic member of Congress, the big networks really only want to have you on to talk about Russia or talk about Donald Trump. Those are the things that they've determined will draw the most eyeballs, and they're running a profit-driven news operation. I put news in quotation marks. And the consequence of that is that the discussion of things that might be considered wonky or political just never happens on corporate television. So, this discussion of the interstate crosscheck program, the Republicans' voter suppression efforts, has yet, frankly, to break through into the mainstream. And I'm concerned that it never will. Because of the rather heavy Republican and conservative bias of all of these large corporate, behemoths that run our media.
And that's why it's even more critically important, Tom, that we get the precincts filled and do the end run around the 6 media conglomerates that are controlling the messaging, because the general population is not getting this, and we're in big danger.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Thank you, Bob. Well said. Stacy in Phoenix, Arizona? Yeah, yes. Presumably. Hey, Stacy, what's up?
Oh, I want to thank you very much for all that you do, Tom. But it's been brought to my attention through TV and some interviews that are happening is that these migrants, I want to call them migrants.
Let's call them refugees, which is what they are.
Okay,
they're seeking refuge. They're seeking asylum. They're not coming here for a better job. They're literally fleeing death in their home countries.
Yes, but they were separated from their children.
Right.
Now it's reported that they're having to pay the airfare to get reunited with their children.
Right.
Is this true?
As far as I can tell, that's what I've seen in the news too.
Is there a way that these refugees can do a class action lawsuit against the government or Donald Trump himself?
I don't know, and I don't know how this is going to play out. And I think this policy by the Trump administration is execrable. It's terrible. It's unfortunate.
It's despicable.
Yeah, to say the very least. So, Stacey, go ahead. You were saying?
I think that this whole regime, I'm sorry to call it that, but that's what it is. It's just despicable.
Yeah, I'm with you.
What he is doing is totally taking our proud name of the United States of America, and he is literally trashing it and flushing it down the toilet.
Yeah, all around the world, on a bunch of different fronts. This is one of the more obvious ones. I'm with you, Stacey. Stacey, thank you for the call. We're just going to have to, contact our elected members and raise hell in the social media. And Robert in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Robert, thanks for listening to The Revolution. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks. I appreciate you taking me a call, and I enjoy your show immensely. One time in my life, I was the press secretary for the current minority leader of the Senate when he was a lowly member of the House. And I was just calling. I just wanted to go off of what the last caller just said, that I think that the president is very much in danger of losing the Catholic vote over his treatment of the immigrant population, particularly all of these thousands of families that were separated from their children at the border. And, I would just encourage you and all of your listeners, listened to you yesterday and the man who called in who is a non-practicing Catholic now, that the Catholic vote is not monolithic. And, that many Catholics are extremely concerned about social justice and particularly the treatment of the poor and of immigrants who, frankly, are the future of the Catholic Church in the United States. So, you know, Jesus told us that we were going to be judged largely by how we treat the poor and also how we treat the stranger and whether they welcome them. So, you know, I just think that all of us need to look at each other's ideas, and whether we disagree with somebody or not, maybe we need to look at the motives that those people have for why they feel the way they do, and consider that, you know, maybe their motivations are not necessarily sinister or in any way aimed at denying certain people their rights.
Yeah, and you know, back during the Vietnam War, you had the Berrigan brothers and all these other folks. I mean, the Catholic commitment to social justice is long and deep, and Pope Francis right now embodies it brilliantly and speaks out on these issues regularly. What baffles me is how the president and previous Republican administrations are so successful in finding troglodyte right-wing Catholics to put on the Supreme Court, principally because of their opposition to abortion. It just blows my mind, and I think it's hurting the image of Catholics all across the country. A lot of people don't, you know, they think that that's the definition of Catholic now, and it's not. It's absolutely not. Robert, thank you for the call. Well said, and you know, we need to, I think, highlight these things more often. Liz in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Liz, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'll take your answer, you know, off the phone. I'm just really concerned about us having another market crash and what to do with the money that I have in savings right now.
Right.
And just to be prepared, because in 2008 we weren't prepared, and it screwed up a lot of people's retirement and such.
Yep.
And should I invest in gold, or what should I do?
I would. What I am doing, Liz, is keeping as much of my retirement money as I can in basically cash, and not being in the big New York banks, but instead being in local credit unions and things like that. That's where I would start. And but you know, Liz, I can't. I'm a lousy investment advisor. I'm not the person to tell you what to do on this. You know, I've lost more money than I've made trying to invest my own money over the years. So, but you know, my experience from 2007, you know, during that time, I went into cash about a year before the market crashed, because it just felt to me like a market crash was coming, and I talked about it on this program, and that served me well, because you know, I wasn't in the stock market when it went down. But on the other hand, I stayed in cash largely, and I didn't ride the market back up, and I could have, you know, doubled my money. So I'm not the guy to listen to, but there's a lot of good sources out there. Liz, thank you for the call. Let's see here, Rob in Milpitas, California. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Since it's anything goes summer, I figured I'd talk about reparations, something you've sensitized me to. And then when I saw an article in Yes Magazine by Chris Moore Bachman talking about reparations, it connected with something else I was doing. He was saying that basically he got the message from his daughter in a conversation with her, because he had been doing an article, and she basically said regarding reparations, you know, say you're sorry, teach the young so it doesn't keep getting repeated. And I would say that the National Sorry Day in Australia kind of addresses those two areas. But the third one was the real key for me. It says, do what you can. And something that I could do to create a form of reparations, a form of empowering people of color in this country, is to help them get back their voting rights and their votes being counted accurately. So I was involved with some folks, and we put together, you know, basically a variation on the indivisible document, and this one is addressing voter suppression and hackable voting machines, and going to your secretaries of state and your registrar of voters and really pushing them to do the right thing. And if the website, if you want more information or get a copy of the document, is electionintegritycaucus.us. electionintegritycaucus.us. And like I said, it really recommends that people in red states living in with these conditions actually work with their local officials and see what they can make happen between now and November.
Yeah, sounds like a good plan, a very good plan, and thank you for the call. And our show on Tuesday really it really hit me how deep the wounds are in the hearts and souls of African Americans, in particular, from slavery, from Jim Crow, from ongoing redlining. I mean, and ongoing racism. On the one hand, racism, and the contrast with the extraordinary levels of privilege that are available to white people in this society. It's something that we all need to be paying attention to, and it's time to talk about reparations. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And yeah, getting back the vote is a good starting point, particularly given how Crosscheck has been systematically removing African Americans from the voting rolls. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jack, watching Free Speech TV in Petaluma, California. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom. I'm wondering about the effects of the tariffs on the people in the Great Lakes area.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is just south of Erie.
Mm-hmm.
And during the steel leaving Pittsburgh, I unfortunately was in on that. And so I moved to California to get work. But there was no safety net for those people when, like tariffs, you're going to have several 100,000 people losing their jobs because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like, it's opening a door for Oxycontin, alcohol abuse, other things that are, and there's no safety net in Congressman Pocan's area because of their governor.
Yeah.
I watched Ed Schultz as he screamed on MSNBC when he was at the Capitol trying to help those union workers, like firemen and teachers. And
well, now the Supreme Court has even, chopped a hole in their ability to unionize if they're firemen or teachers or other government employees. This most recent decision.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much going on. In terms of the damage from the tariffs, that's going to be a tough one. I mean, because Trump is doing his tariffs, and we're going to be talking with Lori Wallach about this at the top of the hour, because Trump is doing his tariffs in a way that is not systemic. In other words, he's not saying, okay, here's my proposal to you, Congress. We need to have these tariffs on these products for this period of time, and make it longer than his presidency, because he's not doing that, but instead he's doing this by executive order, all of these things, which means that, and he's using a national security excuse to do it, which is provided for in all our trade agreements, but they're all asserting that he's misusing it. Although they're still reacting to it. But because he's doing it the way he's doing it, it's not going to survive his presidency. So when he leaves, whether it's a Democrat or Republican coming in, they can change it, they can do away with it, they can just, and every big company in America knows that. So if you're, Caterpillar making farm equipment now in China, or if you're Whirlpool now making washers and dryers in China, or if you're, a steel mill someplace, or a steel let's say a car manufacturer buying steel from Germany or China, and you're thinking about building a new factory in the United States to make Caterpillars or to make washing machines or to manufacture, steel or cars for that matter, you're looking at a 10, 20, 30-year times window in which your investment has to pay back, and your investment is going to be hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And companies are simply not willing to put hundreds of millions or billions of dollars on a 30-year time scale on the line in exchange for a tariff protection that's going to evaporate in either 2 or 6 years, and maybe before that, if it's successfully challenged. So because Trump is doing this in such a screwed up way, basically all he's doing is causing damage. I mean, it's a good thing, I think, that he's causing a national conversation about it. I actually am pleased to see that, but the way he's doing this is so wrong. Jack, thanks a lot for the call, and tragically, there's going to be no support for these people who are hurt by it. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, T-H-O-M.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook.
Media news and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us is the author of Sideswiped, Congressman Bob Ney. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Tom.
So what's up in the world today?
Well, I know you have probably went over and over, the Senate hearing where the Secretary of State Pompeo has been, grilled. But
we haven't had an opportunity even to get to talking about that yet. So
okay.
Has anything happened of consequence? It looked to me like it was just a giant song and dance routine.
Okay, it was, and he answered what he wanted to answer about Putin and Trump, and then when he didn't want to, the president's conversations are private, et cetera, et cetera. Quite an exchange between he and Senator Menendez. It wasn't just the Democratic side, by the way. Senator Corker, the chair of the committee, had problems trying to find out where on earth the administration stood on a variety of issues. But the one thing that came out of here that I thought was unbelievable is what Senator Ben Cardin, a Democratic member, asked the Secretary of State, and he said, and went back to the quote in 2016 of where Pompeo said that we should, quote, withdraw unilaterally from the Iran nuclear agreement. And what he said yesterday is, quote, I want to fix this deal. That is the objective, and I think that's in the best interest of the United States of America about Iran, which is just completely running contrary to anything he has done, from the president canceling the Iran nuclear deal to the tweets last week that almost said, I'm going to push the nuke button. And the reason I bring this up, too, is because of the fact that the administration is saying, look, he said things about Kim Jong-un, Rocket Man, et cetera, and then they met together. There is a difference. With Kim Jong-un, you have South Korea, and you also have Japan, who no matter what wanted a deal, no matter who was calling whom what.
And China, too.
Right. Oh, yes, and China, too, of course. You're right. And this case, you have Saudi Arabia and Israel who do not want a deal. So, that is a big factor. I mean, that's an important factor, in this whole ballgame.
Right. So Trump pulled us out of the treaty. By the way, has that been completed yet? I understood that it took like a year to pull out of that treaty.
Well, yes, technically, I mean, there's pieces that they have to do. The other thing is, and the president knows this, you can't just go back and you can technically undo the sanctions, but then you have a problem. Our problem would be, what about all of Europe who they're still part of this deal because they didn't go along with President Trump. Therefore, we would begin to sanction countless businesses in Europe that after this deal did business with Iran, and now it's illegal to because of them doing business with the United States, Europeans, and with Iran.
Right.
Now, this is a business side to this, Tom, too.
Right.
How do you go back now
when does that drop? I mean, when does that happen? At what point do we start actually, are we out of the deal far enough that we can actually start saying to our to companies in Europe, you may not sell in the United States because you're selling stuff to Iran.
No, I don't think we're out of the deal far enough to do that. But at some point in time, the president could direct Treasury, which enforces this, to start to do that. It will cause havoc.
Yeah.
I promise you, in so many aspects, business-wise, and more havoc for Europe, frankly, than possibly Iran. And of course, the president's playing into the hands of the 12th century clerics, who are now blaming the woes on America versus on themselves, in the country of Iran.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I wanted to mention the impeachment quote. Mm-hmm. If the Republicans were truly serious about what they wanted to do with Rosenstein, they could have done a privileged motion, which would have immediately brought it to the floor of the House, and the Speaker would have had a 2-day preceding vote. So they could have done a privileged motion on impeaching him, and the Speaker would have been forced without debate to do a vote within 2 days. Now, the Speaker came out today and threw cold water on the entire proposal. So I just want to point out this was pure dog and pony, the whole thing.
Remarkable.
Because if they were serious, they would have done a privileged resolution.
Yeah.
And one item, Tom, that is not in the news notes, but I wanted to bring it up because, you look at immigration a lot. And I raised this once before, and if somebody would ever dig into this from the congressional level, I think we would be in shock. We talk about, illegal immigration and undocumented immigrants and what's going on with the policy. In the Philippines, there's a 90% approval of marriages between Americans and Filipinos. That has dropped to 62%. That's the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
India, and I said this before on your show, I know of 4 personal cases now where for no reason, they won't tell them, they have disapproved marriages where these women had a 7-year relationship. Now, we can talk about the Indian or the Tibetan guys that didn't get approved, but what about that American's right to marry? Right. Now, those are just 2 countries, but I did want to mention students are being denied right and left, and a student was denied last week in Delhi, India, because they said, we don't know how you will work in the future to pay off any loans you incur in the approved college you want to go to in America. They're saying, we don't think you can do it down the road when you work in India.
Are they forbidding Americans from marrying people of European ancestry?
Now, that's the question. I don't know. And I surely hope somebody in Congress, if I was back there, I would love to take a look at this. Somebody needs to demand statistics.
Yeah, because so far it looks like every country you've defined is not a majority Caucasian country.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Fascinating stuff. Bob Ney, Congressman, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back with Lori Wallach. We're going to talk trade right after the news at the top of the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, I'm...
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, T-H-O-M. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people, and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior, which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing, but the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party of the 1800s, there was a very, even by today's standards, progressive faction. The radical Republicans were a splinter group that emerged in a big way from the Republican Party at its founding in 1854. And just after the Civil War in 1866, they gained a majority among Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they had a powerful influence until the faction disintegrated in the 1870s during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. They supported the absolute right of freed slaves to vote and participate in government. It goes on from there. Unequal protection, corporate power.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Let's talk with Lori Wallach. There's some just amazing stuff going on the trade front right now, and the executive director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, tradewatch.org or citizen.org/trade, is Lori Wallach, friend of the show. Lori, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm up here in Washington, up on the hill in the belly of the beast.
Oh, my. And people can tweet you at Wallach Lori, L-O-R-I. Lori, I wrote an op-ed about this for Alternet. I don't know if you saw it a couple days ago, suggesting that Donald Trump is so incompetent that even that, when he was first elected, Bernie, Nancy Pelosi, me on this program, we all said, there are some areas where he campaigned, like, for example, on changing our trade systems, where we broadly agree with him and we will work with him if he's got some reasonable policies. But he is doing all this trade stuff by executive order, which means that, because it's not being run through Congress, which means it could evaporate the day he leaves office. And I don't see where any American companies are going to invest hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in new factories to build washing machines or make steel or whatever, based on a promise that can only last at the most 6 years. And, it just doesn't seem like it would make sense. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's interesting you ask, because today in the Senate Appropriations Committee, that the top trade ambassador, who's part of the cabinet, a guy named Robert Lighthizer, was asked similar questions by various senators. The gist of what he said actually made more sense than anything this administration has said to explain their various trade actions. He said that we needed to basically make two things clear. One, that the status quo of the U.S. being the place every other country dumped their subsidized exports, from whom technology was taken, but then production was done in another country, that we had to signal that that was over and that the U.S. wasn't going to continue to have this huge chronic job-killing trade deficit. And then number two, he spoke specifically with respect to China. We needed to effectively cut off the ability of China to have its government elite rely on stability in their country based on making a lot of stuff, most of it subsidized, and selling it here and expecting that the U.S. would just absorb those goods and outsource its job.
Right.
And that from his narrative of this, the tariffs are a tool to basically make clear in a practical way, just cut off the dumping, that these Chinese goods cannot just continue to be subsidized and dumped here. And that said, it has been the first time a narrative of what they're up to has been put forward, and there has been an enormous amount of chaos, and I would say some recklessness with respect to what countries are getting targeted. The trade minister, the trade representative, basically explained some of the technical points, which is, if you just sanction China and then China sells the stuff to Canada, which then sells it to us, you haven't. The way he put it is it's like fishing with a big hole in your net. So there seems to be some elements of logic, but boy, you wouldn't know it from the way it's been implemented. Another really interesting thing that came out in the hearing is the fact that this guy, who seems to have a strategy, isn't actually in charge of a bunch of these tariffs. He's focused on the ones specifically about China and technology theft. Mm-hmm. But apparently the Commerce Department is 100% in control of all of these tariffs that have been hitting Europe and have been hitting Canada and Mexico.
This is the billionaire...
232.
232, I'm sorry?
The steel and aluminum tariff.
Right. But what you're saying is that Wilbur Ross at the Commerce Department is doing this rather than Robert Lighthizer, the economic advisor.
So, yes. And Lighthizer is the guy who's renegotiating NAFTA. Right. And here's the thing. The tariffs are kind of spun out of control. Believe it or not, the NAFTA renegotiations are still going pretty damn well.
Yeah, I saw you set out a note today saying today's D.C. visit by top Mexican trade officials may reveal whether a renegotiated NAFTA deal can be signed in 2018. Is this good news?
Yeah, well, I think it's super helpful that basically the top officials of the incoming progressive AMLO administration is now joining in Washington the current trade minister of the existing administration in Mexico, and they're sitting down with their equivalent in the U.S., Lighthizer. And the shift that's happened basically is after the Mexican presidential election. The outgoing administration, the incoming administration both agree for different reasons that they really want the current president to sign this deal. AMLO doesn't necessarily want to have this be one of the first things he does. So there is now 1 month and 5 days before they run out of time to have a deal they could sign this year, and that's because of the U.S. legislative procedures that have to have 90 days of advance notice to Congress. So if they don't get a deal announced by the 31st of August, officially sent to Congress with a formal announcement, then it can't be signed by this Mexican president, and then a lot of uncertainty enters into the dynamic.
So what might a renegotiated NAFTA deal look like? First of all, would it be just Mexico and the United States? Trump has talked about bilateral deals rather than multilateral deals as his preference.
Yeah, I think the strategy here is that Canada's been basically playing rope-a-dope. They won't come to negotiations. If they come, they won't make any deals. Mexico seemed very committed to getting a new deal. So I think that the strategy is both Mexico and the U.S. think Canada will come to the table with more seriousness if they realize that the U.S. and Mexico either are about to have a deal or have a deal.
Right.
So they've stopped sort of waiting for Canada to show up, and they're just proceeding, the U.S. and Mexico are proceeding toward the deal. And they've been getting some remarkably good stuff agreed. When I say remarkably good, from a progressive's perspective, remarkably good. And I've actually spent the last 2 weeks up in the Hill talking to members of Congress. And actually, it's very funny because this very day I have my nephew with me, Noe. He's been going to legislative meetings, and he's got a new name for NAFTA. Not a fair trade agreement. So we've got it.
Thank you.
Lobbyist up here, and what we've been telling members of Congress is that you got to get the incentives for outsourcing there at the heart of NAFTA removed. You got to add binding labor and environmental standards to bring up wages. You got to get rid of the ban and buy local and buy American. And you have to do something about wages in Mexico, which now are as low as in China. They're down since NAFTA.
And how about taking out Chapter 11?
Well, and I'm just getting there. And those are all things that Mexico and the U.S. are getting close to. And here's something really exciting. The countries have basically agreed to get out investor-state dispute settlement.
That's Chapter 11 that I mentioned, yeah. That's great.
The U.S. said, we're not going to do it. You guys can do it together if you want. And then Mexico said, well, we're not going to do it if you're not going to do it. Then Canada said, oops,
And for people who don't know what we're talking about, these ISDS, this Chapter 11 agreement, is basically if a company in Mexico doesn't like a law in the United States. For example, we passed a law protecting, dolphin-safe tuna, right? Creating that whole thing that you had to, if you're going to fish for tuna, you had to do it a certain way that didn't kill dolphins. And a Mexican company sued the United States under NAFTA, saying that's a violation of our right to free trade. And the three-judge tribunal, essentially, who are all corporate lawyers for NAFTA, ruled against the United States. And, that was the end of what had been a 25-year-long campaign by the American Humane Society to get legislation passed. And tuna is no longer dolphin safe in the United States. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. That's the kind of thing that happens under Chapter 11 of NAFTA, the investor-state dispute settlements, that you're saying both countries are now saying we don't have to do this.
Well, and that back and forth between the countries and changing the laws is really bad. Then in addition, this investor state allows the corporations to directly sue the government. So folks remember like the XL pipeline fight? Well, when Obama said, nope, TransCanada, you can't, we're not permitting that, you can't do that, public doesn't want it, not good for the climate. That company demanded $15 billion from U.S. taxpayers because their NAFTA rights, their right to invest and have a pipeline, have been denied.
Right.
And they basically held on to this $15 billion sword of Damocles, saying to Trump, unless and until you reauthorize that pipeline, $15 billion, and we're going to go have that fight in front of 3 corporate attorneys, and there's not any appeal. We get special rights as corporations under NAFTA. It's so blatant. And there's just a whole string of those cases. So at this point, just under $500 million has been paid out in these NAFTA investor attacks on the environment, energy, health, toxic bans, water policies, timber policies. And, Tom, between the fact that there are $4 billion in additional ISDS cases pending under NAFTA, and every week more jobs are being outsourced under NAFTA using the NAFTA rules, as you said. Anyone who wants to look it up, Tom's right. Go to Google NAFTA and look for Chapter 11. That's what he was talking about. Those are the investor outsourcing protections. It's not a problem of the 90s. It's continuing every day. We cannot have it stay this way. So the good news is campaign has really been building up. If folks want to get involved, you can go to a website called Replace NAFTA, www.replace NAFTA. And across the country this August, folks are going to be meeting up with their members of Congress, some of them at their offices if they'll take a meeting. Otherwise, they're going to find them at parades and events. And they're going to be coming with a demand that has unified environmental, labor, consumer, civil rights, faith groups across the country, which is a NAFTA replacement must be concluded, and you have to get rid of the investor-state investor protections that are rigging the rules for outsourcing and exposing our laws to attack, and you have to add labor and environmental standards that are really enforced. And then we'll have, basically, that's the demand of progressives for decades.
Yeah, and hopefully...
I don't think a lot of Republicans would support that, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and hopefully, the Trump administration will make it happen. I mean, I'm not holding my breath on them doing anything competently, but we'll see. We'll see. Lori Wallach, Executive Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, tradewatch.org. You can tweet her at Wallach Lori. Lori, thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Always great talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back, Zach in Hollywood. Hey, Zach, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Unfortunately, we might have to wait for these 26-year-olds that just graduated from Princeton and just inherited their daddy's oil futures, and we might have to wait for these guys to get gray, but I hope not. Anyway, I've got kind of a two-part offering here, and I'll take your response off the air. A message for the Dems to grab onto. Eco Blue Wave, united majority for fair markets and clean energy. But from climate to guns to education to our financial and political structure, it's all health care. It's all health care. I mean, you can draw a straight line to any dot. You got a mental case standing there putting holes in you with an AR-15. It's not too good for your health. But more broadly, the health care issue for the planet and her inhabitants.
Yeah.
And the children coming up that if they had a couple of bucks could form a more safe, sane, clean, lean system. So for 2018, protect the vote. More importantly, protect and monitor the count. And hashtag paper ballots. Eco Blue Wave. Thanks, Tom. I'll see you guys.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Zach. Good to hear from you. Let's see here. Doreen in central Nebraska. Hey, Doreen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So what's on my mind is that everybody can think of something to do, like buy local. I like that last lady who was talking about so much I couldn't take it all in. But one thing I like to tell people to do is to get on their state treasuries unclaimed funds and check it every 3 months. Check in every state you've ever lived in. Check in every state your parents ever lived in if they're deceased. And you might find one for yourself, your kids, you know, your grandkids, people you know you can tell about it, and then they can maybe find some money and help them through the tough times, because times are tough.
Yeah. Excellent point. Thank you. Thank you for that, Doreen.
You're welcome.
I appreciate the call. And let's see, Charlotte in Crown Point, Indiana. Hey, Charlotte, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind? We have a minute.
Hi, Tom. The reason I'm calling is I wonder if you've heard about this potential voter suppression thing that's happening in Indiana. I went to the License Bureau yesterday to renew my registration for my plates, and I found out that they have something now called, quote, Real ID.
Right.
It's REAL.
Right.
ID,
No, this is a national law that was passed during the Bush administration, requiring states to merge basically their driver's license database with the FBI and federal agencies, so that and the argument is with this Real ID that you can use it going through airports and things. The feds have all your data. And so it's like a nationwide system rather than just a statewide system. And there's a few states, I think there maybe is only one state left that hasn't migrated to the Real ID system. But pretty soon, if you don't have Real ID, if you don't have that star on your driver's license, you will not be able to get on an airplane. So.
Well, what about voting? Can they require that for voting?
I don't know. That's a very good question, Charlotte. I don't know. That would be a state-by-state thing, and that would depend on what the state's laws said. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Back. Picking up some of your phone calls and thoughts and concerns, and you know what's on your mind today. John in San Francisco. Hey, John, thanks for listening on AM 910 in San Francisco. What's up?
Hi, Tom, and welcome back to the airwaves of the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area.
Thank you.
I just had a comment regarding the discussion this week about black and white issues. And 2 weeks ago, I went to the inauguration of London Breed for mayor, and she totally gets the issue that I'm going to propose, and that is it's not about black and white, it's about rich and poor. And her whole campaign platform has been about homelessness and mental health, access to mental health, and that's her primary issue, and she gets that. And it's not about these racial divisions, or sexual divisions, whatever. It's about rich and poor, and access to health care, and access to housing, and access to mental health treatment. And I just wanted to put that out there that I think she gets it, and I think it's long overdue that we stop thinking in that box and start thinking that it's really about rich and poor.
Yeah. Well,
think?
I completely agree, and very well said. John, thanks for the call, and thanks for pointing that out. Bart in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Bart, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'd like to bring up an issue and put it back on the front burner again, and that's the issue of DACA.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering if this is unintended consequences on the part of the Trump administration, that all of these young children, adolescents, and young adults that are now going to be in limbo if they can't get in touch with their parents, who now have been illegally sent back, deported because the parents didn't know what they were signing. And they're out there, and I wonder if they're going to be now a part of the DACA population.
Well, they won't be, because the DACA program has been suspended by Trump. I mean, it was created by Obama by executive order. Trump suspended it by executive order back in March. And the only reason that it hasn't been completely cut off now is because you got a federal court that intervened and said, wait a minute, you can't stop this until it's been adjudicated. So I think, wondering whether the kids who've been separated from their parents and the hundreds of children the Trump administration is now saying you may never go back to your parents, where they're going to end up. I think that would be premature on DACA. But to that point, Pramila Jayapal and Kirsten Gillibrand, they're talking about this 8-year-old girl who was taken away from her mother. The people at ICE, or the people who kept her at the shelter, told her, this 8-year-old, that her mother had abandoned her and she would have to live in the shelter until she was 18 years old. She believed them and completely turned against her mother. She was reunited this week, and she doesn't want to talk to her mother or see her mother. Her mother is beside herself. This is the kind of evil that's coming out of this administration. Bart, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Calls after this. Back with your calls after this. 202-808-9925. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Living in the Chemical Age, How an Ounce of Prevention Can Protect Your Family from a World of Toxins by Dr. Janet Newman. This is from Chapter 1, How Did We End Up Here? In modern history, we entered the industrial age with the invention of steam-driven engines in the 1760s. In the technological age, the second industrial age, which took place between 1870 and 1914, we saw the advancement and expansion of both manufacturing and electrically powered systems. In the last quarter of the 20th century, we entered the information age, when computers and the internet became the norm. Famous author and editor Leon Weitzeiler wrote a poignant book review in the New York Times on January 11, 2015, which said, quote, "Every technology is used before it is completely understood. There's always a lag between innovation and the apprehension of its consequences," end quote. While these great advances in modern history have made aspects of our lives easier and more convenient, a negative byproduct has resulted that we are beginning to recognize. It now seems that we are in the full-blown midst of what I refer to as the chemical age, an era in which our environments and bodies are the constant recipient of a deluge of chemicals, which are the unfortunate byproducts of our drive for advancement. This bombardment of toxic chemical exposure is silent and in most cases hidden. but it has the potential to be deadly. These chemicals are in our food and in our tap water, and on any given day we're exposed to dozens of toxins in our environment, as well as in the products we choose to clean our homes and to use on our bodies. For the first time in human history, the New England Journal of Medicine tells us children born today will have a shorter projected lifespan than their parents, in large part due to obesity-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, etc. They will likely get diagnosed with a disease at an earlier age and die earlier than their parents. Generations have always outlived the generation before them, but not anymore. People are getting sicker earlier. But why? A growing number of doctors and scientists now recognize many illnesses result from excessive exposure to toxic materials in our environment. The body tends to become inflamed and accumulate fat when storing excess toxins. This is a global wake-up call. How did we get to this point? And what can you do to keep yourself and your family safe? Many scientists and notable organizations, such as the Agency for Toxic Substances and the Disease Registry, have begun to study the impact of toxic substances on humans, which is an essential first step to fixing the problems we're encountering. For instance, for example, the incidence of colon and rectal cancer, once considered rare in young people, is on the rise in people in their 20s and 30s. According to the American Cancer Society, people born in 1990 have double the colon cancer and quadruple the risk of rectal cancer compared to someone born in 1950. This ominous trend is part of a larger trend toward increased rates of cancer in general. According to Cancer.org, today 1 in 2 males and 1 in 3 males have a lifetime risk of developing cancer. Cancer is widely known to be related to lifestyle and environment. The American Cancer Society says that only 5 to 10% of all cancer cases can be attributed to genetic defects. Almost 25 to 30% of all cancer deaths today are due to tobacco. As many as 30 to 35% are linked to diet and obesity, and 15 to 20% are due to infections, mostly liver cancer related to hepatitis C or alcohol use. The remaining percentage, somewhere between 5 and 25%, is mostly due to environmental pollutions, radiation exposure, and stress. The emerging science of epigenetics, which looks at how the environment impacts your genes, is showing us that toxins that can activate the genes responsible for causing cancer. The choices we make have a powerful effect on which genes are switched on and off, and ultimately on whether we get cancer or not. However, cancer isn't the only concern. The 2013 documentary film The Human Experiment points out that 7.3 million American couples have trouble conceiving or carrying to term. This is a 49% increase since 1988, with the biggest increase in women under 25. Autism and other childhood diseases are also on the rise. According to the CDC, in the 1980s, about 1 in 10,000 children had autism. In 1999, 1 in 500 kids had autism. In 2008, it was 1 in 88 kids. And in 2016, it was 1 in 68 children. It's 5 times more common in boys. The current figures for autism are 1 in 42 boys and 1 in 189 girls. In the past 50 years, childhood asthma has gone up 80%, leukemia 74%, ADHD 53%, and life-threatening birth defects are up 100%. Something in our environment must be playing a role in these staggering trends. Did you know that air pollution is rising in world cities at an alarming rate? According to the World Health Organization, outdoor air pollution has grown 8% globally every year since 2012, with billions of people around the world now exposed to dangerous air. Dr. Flavia Bustreo, Assistant Director General for Family, Women's and Children's Health for the World Health Organization, has said, quote, as urban air quality declines, the risk of stroke, heart disease, lung cancer, and chronic and acute respiratory diseases, including asthma, increases for the people who live in them. When dirty air blankets our cities, the most vulnerable are the most impacted, living in the chemical age.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Here's a picture of children and refugee advocates. And let's start calling them refugees, and let's start correcting the media whenever they call them immigrants. These people, at least the vast majority of these people, and it looks like 100%, are not people who are coming here looking for a job. There are people who are fleeing their home countries, fleeing for their lives, and with their children, taking a huge risk to save their children from violence and death in their home countries. So these refugees. So anyhow, advocates for these refugees have just sat into at the Hart Senate office building with a whole bunch of children holding big signs that say, "I am a child." A great photo opportunity. I love, political theater, and this is what's happening. The Hill reports with crayons and Play-Doh, children drew pictures and sang songs in the building. They wore T-shirts and held signs that read, "I am a child," a reference to the "I am a man" posters during the 1960s civil rights movement. The demands were clear: the reunification of all migrant families and in safety now. Over 3,000 children have been separated from their parents by this brutal Trump administration policy. It's incredible. Katie in Hamul, California. Hey, Katie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just a quick comment about narcissists, because thank goodness my stepdaughter is divorcing one right now, but it's been very disruptive to the family. And I said long before Trump was around that I knew about him. Boy, a narcissist certainly disrupts an entire family, and now we have one at the head of our United States family.
Yeah.
And the thing I noticed with this particular man, who's in his 50s, as he started having medical problems, and Trump is 70-something, the one thing they cannot control is the ravages of age, and they go, even crazier.
Yeah.
So that was just my thought that leads me to, I'm not terribly hopeful, because this guy is definitely not going to have a healthy physical body, and he's going to make sure all the rest of us suffer for even more than that.
Yeah.
What I do, and maybe you've had other callers call in with the same thing, that I haven't heard it for a while. I've been listening for a couple of weeks now, fairly steadily. But I talk to everybody, and when I turned 70 this last year, I just decided I'm shameless. I'm kind of a chatter, but I see the same people at the grocery store, the checkers, and you establish a relationship, and I have you find some common ground, even with people that put you on hold on the phone. And they're phenomenally decent. Frontline people are at some of the most evil companies. They're frontline people. You ask if they have a union. They want to talk about it. You ask if they have health care. They want to talk about it. And you do the same thing with just face-to-face with people. And I was just thinking what my sister and my brother-in-law, one of my sisters, does is that they carry in their car voter registration packets. They have the clipboard, and they just will say, "When's your break?" We're all retired. And, they'll say, "Would you mind? Do you want to sign up?"
Wow.
And I'm going to do that. I'm a little less, I'm a little more bashful to do that, but by golly, I'm going to do it this year.
Sure.
But I have a really fortunate in, because I do spend half of my life in Australia. I'm a permanent resident, and I can talk about health care I have been for years, from a personal standpoint. And it's amazing to me that even young registered voters, their eyes bug out, or they gasp when I'm talking to them on the phone, and I cannot believe that they're still. I'm assuming on the phone they're in their 20s. Some of them that I talked to were in their 20s, maybe early 30s, and they still can't get the picture. They go to work every day. If they want to change jobs, as my dual citizen kids do, who live now permanently in Australia, that they'll always be covered, and I think that is just phenomenally important.
Well,
now, that's my particular in with people.
Katie, if I may interrupt you, the story that you tell these young people about your experience with the Australian healthcare system and how single payer works in Australia. If it causes their eyes to bug out, I would love you to tell that story very briefly to me right now, in the hopes that some of our viewers or listeners may be going, "Whoa, really?" So tell us what it's like, please.
Well, really? I assume that your listeners are pretty savvy about such things, but no, my husband's Australian, and he retired from California about 9 or 10 years ago, and so thankfully he went to Australia to work, and so I ended up there at the good graces of their paying my way. And of course, I became a permanent resident. I have had a couple of health issues in the past 2 years. So the way that it works is that our kids earn under the income of where they would have to pay into the system. They are in their early and mid-30s, okay? So they can go and get absolutely free medical care.
Including operations, including hospitalization, including
my son had
prescription
an emergency
drugs.
appendectomy and didn't pay anything.
Right, literally nothing. And does this include dental and vision and mental health as well?
You know, it doesn't. Isn't that something?
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can't have everything.
I'd love to say it just doesn't, but by golly, you've got at least some money to cover that when you know. So the other thing is, I was hospitalized twice in the past year, and I went to both a public, a hospital, and to a private hospital because my husband and I pay into the system to get a little bit fancier, but no better service. But I noticed that the difference between the public hospital, as I mentioned to my husband as I'm walking down to the room, is, oh my goodness, they have better art in the private hospital than they do in the public hospital, and that was about it.
That was the only difference, was the quality of the art on the walls.
I mean, and he agreed with me, and he is in that system. So I mean, he's in the hospital system. So I mean, he's completely pleased. He sees that the need for improvements, all kinds of places like Australians do. Once it gets started, I say, oh, please,
At least you've got something. At least you've got something.
And and of course, dental and vision is definitely true. But no, my kids my daughter went back to school to just to get an advanced degree. She's got health care. And when I start talking like this to young people, they honestly don't go, yeah, I know that, and we're the dummies, or anything like that. They go, you're kidding.
Well, this is true of every.
They're not.
This is true of in the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the 34 richest countries, or maybe it's 35 now, richest countries in the world. The other 34 of them, and this goes all at the bottom of that pile is Costa Rica, right? It starts with the United States, and at the entire organization, every country, with the exception of the United States, has a national health care program that covers everybody in the country. Every single one. We are the village idiots. Katie, I need to move along, but thank you for the call, and thank you for the great points you made and for sharing your stories. It was just some great stuff. Betsy in Minneapolis. Hey, Betsy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I love your show, and everybody is so smart. That's what I'm calling about, is I'm worried about your president. He's not so smart. And he may do a lot of things, good things, by accident. As his incompetence, I don't think he can do any good things on purpose, but I don't think he wants to. I guess that's the bottom. So I guess what I'm worried about is, yes, some good things may come of it. There are some areas of agreement with progressives from your president. Believe it or not, he used to be a Democrat. But what I'm saying is the greater picture, the bigger picture, is very scary of the things that he is trying to do and seemingly accomplishing without much effort. Although I have one question I don't know the answer to, maybe your smart listeners do. How many actual laws, has he actually signed?
I don't, any laws of great consequence. I think the number is very, very small. He's, and I know one of the first things, and it had to pass Congress, so it has to be a law or a regulatory change, was allowing coal companies to dump their waste in rivers. That was like one of the very first things that he did, and that he cited as one of his big accomplishments, rolling back regulations on coal. So people downriver from coal mines are getting poisoned now with mercury and cadmium and beryllium.
I wonder how is that Pennsylvania? I wonder how the flooding affects that. Anyway, there's a lot of things that I worry about because of his incompetence, because of his lack of skill, because of his lack of intellect, basically. So thanks for my call, but hopefully there'll be a couple of happy accidents.
Well, I don't know about accidents. If by accidents you mean you don't mean anything happening to Trump. You're talking about.
No, I mean happy accidents for our country.
Yeah.
For us.
Okay. Yeah.
For us.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Good to hear from you, Betsy. I appreciate the call. I just have to be very sensitive to any kind of threats or obviously Betsy was not threatening anything. It's 44 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Jesse in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Jesse, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I just heard you say, this Trump administration, and I just couldn't help but think to myself, I was like, that Bill Clinton is the one that actually started ICE, and then Obama started DACA. So all of these problems really have nothing to do with Trump other than Trump enforcing the law.
No, I'm sorry. It's not. Jesse, you're absolutely wrong. You're just simply wrong. I mean, ICE may have started during Bill Clinton. I frankly don't know the history of it. But there is no law that says that an asylum seeker coming to the United States needs to be put into a cage and separated from her children. There is no law that says that, number one, that Trump is following. And number two, the law, no, listen to me for just a minute, Jesse, and then I'll listen to you. And number two, the law that does exist, that is both United States law and international treaty that we have signed, says that for every country in the world, if somebody presents themselves at your border and says, I am fleeing for my life, I am seeking asylum, you have to take them into the country and determine whether their claim is legitimate. And if it is, then you can have quotas on how many asylum seekers you'll take. You can limit it. There's all kinds of ways to get around that, but you must take it seriously. So these people are completely legal in presenting themselves at the border. They didn't even commit the crime of coming into the United States illegally. All of them came in here completely legally. Donald Trump is the one who is breaking the law, and that's why federal judges keep trying to stop him, and in some cases have successfully stopped him. Now it's your turn, Jesse.
Yeah, it's like, why ain't they safe once they get into Mexico? If they're fleeing such violence and such gang violence, why don't they feel safe once they get into Mexico?
Because the gangs that are...
Why do they have to come this far? They're leaving, Guatemala or whatever,
Guatemala,
why don't they
Honduras,
feel? Why don't they feel safe once they get?
That's
into
a good
Mexico?
question. That's a very good question, and I'm guessing that a lot of people are asking.
Why go the extra mile? Why drag your kids the extra mile in Mexico?
My guess is, Jesse, if you're a person of goodwill and good conscience, you would want to know the answer to that.
But it's not about morals; it's about law.
Well, hey, chill out for a second. If the answer to that is that a lot of them are, and I'm guessing the answer probably is, 90% of these people who flee Guatemala, El Salvador, or Nicaragua actually stay in Mexico. And 10% come to the United States, or 3% come to the United States. But if it's 90% coming to the United States, then that would tell you that the same gangs and the same drug lords who are running those three countries now, thanks to Reagan's foreign policy, are also well integrated into Mexico and the Mexican police force and things like that. So if you're fleeing those specific gangs, you're not safe in Mexico either. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know as a parent that if I thought that the situation here in Portland, Oregon was so desperate that my children were going to die, or that I was going to die, but particularly that my children were going to die, and the only way that I could get them to safety would be to travel through Mexico to Guatemala and say, please, give me asylum, I would do it. Wouldn't you?
No, I would stay in Mexico. Why would I drag my kid? How is that not child abuse, dragging your kid across 4 countries?
Yeah, Jesse, you are demonstrating a stunning lack of empathy, just a stunning inability to feel what other people feel. I feel so sad for you, Jesse, and I will pray for you. We'll be back. Welcome back. It's 10 minutes before the hour, and Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I heard a disturbing news clip a few days ago, and I haven't heard anything about it since, and maybe you can clarify it for me if you heard it. Apparently, after the summit, when Putin and Trump met privately, it was on Russian TV a while after that Putin said that our military was going to join the Russian military in Syria and fight for Assad.
Well, the part about fight for Assad is not what I heard. What I did hear is that the Russians were saying that, right now we're coordinating activities in Syria so we don't shoot each other's planes down. We've got a certain area of airspace, they've got a certain area of airspace, and the people on the ground are actually communicating with each other. That was worked out a year ago. What they're talking about is what Putin apparently is suggesting, he and Trump talked about, was expanding that military cooperation across the entire country. And that's something that seems like, since Putin is supporting Assad and we're supporting a rebel group who turns out to be, in many cases, affiliated with ISIS, but whatever, that is probably something that wouldn't be a good idea for either one of us, frankly, from my point of view. Okay. But the fact of the matter is that nobody in the Trump administration is saying that yes, Trump agreed to this, and the Russians are saying yes, he did, and I'm waiting for the tapes to come out, frankly.
Okay, the disturbing part of that, though, was actually something else. I heard that CENTCOM, our main commanding area there, right. Apparently some high-level Russian actually called the commander after the commander said that we had no knowledge of this new policy where we're going to be doing this.
Right.
And this Russian actually said to our CENTCOM commander, how dare you disrespect Trump this way? Is that possible?
Oh, yeah.
That nobody minds that?
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. And the CENTCOM commander himself was on TV. The reporter said, have you been told to work with the Russians? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't think it's a good idea. And
and then Russians called him.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Amazing. No, yeah. I didn't know about that last part, Carol, but it's consistent with this whole narrative. Trump setting up a meeting with the president of any other country in private, in a quiet space, particularly a country that actually has a list of things that they would like out of the United States. Setting up a meeting like that without having his people work out the details in advance, without having at least some witness in the room who can say, yes, this did happen, or no, that didn't happen. He walks in completely unprotected. It's sort of like unprotected sex. Anything could happen. Anything could stick to him as a consequence of that, and he's going to be walking around with this. And the other thing is, 3 days ago on this program, and you can go back and listen to it in the podcast. 3 days ago on this program, I pointed out a news report that I'd seen in the international news, I think it was in the BBC, that Putin had said he's not going to come to Washington, D.C. when Trump invited him to come around the time of the midterm elections. He's just not going to come. No thanks. Right. I'm not interested. 2 days, and it was like 2 days later then, yesterday, Trump comes out and says, I don't want Putin to come because, things are, there's this Russian witch hunt. It's just, we'll wait until it's over. Well, yeah. And the American media is playing it like Trump canceled the trip. Putin canceled the trip 2 days earlier, humiliating Trump. And I don't understand why our television news is not pointing that out. It just boggles my mind because I reported it on this show. It wasn't a secret. Anyhow, Carol, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's all great stuff, all very, very great stuff. Anita in San Antonio. Hey, Anita, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, it's also that he was meeting privately with a country he was being investigated for conspiring with, so I think that was a problem, too.
Right.
But, you had a caller that said that it's not just we need to start talking about it not being about black and white, but it being about rich or poor or class. Mm-hmm. Well, I have to disagree with that because you can be a rich African-American and you still will get harassed by police more often than
Eric Holder talked about, being stopped by the cops as Attorney General.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a friend whose brother was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas, and he was stopped for driving while black.
Right.
Driving to Austin.
Right.
You know, that's just, you know, and he was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas.
Right.
So
Yeah.
those kind of things.
Class offers some small amount of insulation, but you know, driving a fancy car, dressing really well,
Right.
looking like you're affluent, for an African American, it will provide some small amount of protection, but it doesn't give anything close to the protection of white privilege. Nothing close.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, you could be a rich football player and you still get harassed.
Yep.
So,
and in fact,
I think we
we've
have
seen
to
it
keep that
happen.
in mind.
Yeah. Excellent point, Anita. Thank you for calling and making it. Very, very well said. Melissa in, is it Oaxaca, Arizona?
Huachuca City.
Aha. Okay. You say it better than me. So what's up?
I was just responding to the call from Jesse. I travel through Mexico. My husband and I drive through Mexico routinely, and actually the Mexicans really hate the Guatemalans.
So his question was, why are these Guatemalan parents fleeing all the way to the United States and not just to Mexico?
Yeah, I mean there's no safe haven for them in Mexico, and Hondurans pretty much fall into the same realm. I know we had some Hondurans that crossed, you know, in this batch. So, you know, it's just kind of a foolish thought that people ought to stop at the other country.
Are the police as institutionally hostile to Guatemalans in Mexico as they are here?
I don't know that they're any more hostile than they are to us, the U.S. people passing through Mexico.
Right.
It just depends on the mood in the town. So
yeah. So it's Mexico for Mexicans. Interesting. Okay, thank you for that answer to the question that I had asked Jesse. You know, and I didn't know the answer to. I appreciate that, Melissa. Chris in Chicago. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Tom.
We have 1 minute left, Chris. It's all yours.
I got a great story to tell you. I was with a black couple that I had met at a bar. We're driving towards Chicago. You know, I was new to Chicago and all this stuff. The police pulled us over. They pulled me out of the back seat. The Chicago police told me, "You don't want to associate with these people. Start walking."
Wait a minute. They pulled him over for driving while black, or did they pull him over because the guy was a crime lord or something?
No, there was no. I don't know, taillight. I can't remember what it was. All I know
so it
is
was
they
driving
pulled
while
me out
black. Amazing, amazing. Driving while black. Yeah, Chris, thanks for the story. See, I mean, this is real stuff. This is really, and it's got to be really painful stuff for you know, people whose skin is darker than mine. It's just. Hopefully, we can get through all this, right? I mean, we've got so much work to do, so far to go. We've been pulled so back by the Republicans and their identity politics and all this stuff. We need to break through, and I think a big piece of that is going to be what happens in November. So please play your role in that. It's really important. We all get out and get active. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes
from UN
scours
headquarters
the world
in New York,
for
I'm
the
Luke
finest
Vargas with your
wines.
world in
You
2
can get more
minutes.
information about
Head to the
Cameron
websites
Hughes
of
and his
Delta,
wines
American Airlines,
at
or United today and try and buy a trip to Taipei, the capital of Taiwan.
The Thom Hartmann
As of
Program
press
is
time,
brought to you in
each
part by
U.S.
the
carrier
Aiden
lists the
Forecast,
city as
an
a part of
investment newsletter with weekly
TW,
updates
a
of
country
leading
code
market
that
indicators
suggests
and a monthly
Taiwan
deep
is an
dive into what the
independent
details
state.
of the economy and the markets
Taiwan
mean
calls
for
itself the
investors and
Republic of
retirees.
China and
On the web
maintains
at
China has been
aidenmarkets.com.
illegitimately run by communists
Thom Hartmann
since
Program
Mao
is brought to you
Zedong's
in
rise
part
to power
by
in the 1940s.
Superbeats.
Officials in
More information
Beijing
is available
disagree and
over
say
at
the People's Republic of China rightfully governs both the mainland and Taiwan. But the days in which foreign companies can make political statements on that issue and pay no financial price could be over, as airlines face a Wednesday deadline to adopt Beijing's party line or potentially lose access to the Chinese market altogether. According to Reuters, the U.S. airlines that still list Taiwan as independent are prepared to concede the issue. To imagine what that will look like, head to aircanada.com, where Taiwan's international airport is listed as a part of CN, China's country code. And strong-arming airlines is just one part Beijing's strategy to diplomatically isolate Taiwan.
No important country in the world recognizes Taiwan or the Republic of China.
That's Dennis Hickey, Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Missouri State University, who says even more peripheral countries like Paraguay that do recognize Taiwan are facing the squeeze.
They are also pressuring governments that do not have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan to downgrade their unofficial ties and change the names of their unofficial embassies or consulates. What they appear to be doing is slowly taking a few every once in a while, sort of death by 1,000 cuts.
The thinking goes that scrubbing mention of Taiwan from diplomatic buildings or airline websites will hasten the day the island is under Beijing's full control once again. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
It's Thom Hartmann University, and today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader. This is page 266.